Okay, so I am tickled today to have my friend Mike Blake on the horn. Mike and I had a conversation recently about a couple scenarios that had come up where clients had either decided they wanted to sell their business, and I didn't think it was sellable, or they had gotten an offer from somewhere, an unsolicited offer. And so Mike and I ended up chatting about that. Mike is the president, the leader of the helm. What is it, Mike?
Managing partner is my formal title.
Managing partner, boss of everything at Brady, Ware, Arpeggio, and they are a business valuation firm. So you see why we were talking. It makes perfect sense, doesn't it, Mike?
I think so. As
Yeah.
much as anything on the internet can make sense.
So we really just kind of wanted to pull together an encapsulation of our conversation because we thought it would be valuable to business owners of small and mid-sized businesses, and really just kind of narrow it down to three things that they can think about if they are in that scenario where they get an unsolicited offer, or their partner wants to buy them out and they're having to do a valuation on their part of the business, or they're tired like us and they're thinking that, in sometime in the next 3 to 5 years, they might want to sell their business. So the first thing we chatted about, and I'm really going to let you riff on this because this is right in your wheelhouse. What do you think is the most overlooked contributor of value in a business?
Yeah, to me, the most overlooked contributor to value is risk. At the end of the day, value is a function of three things: of potential growth, cash flow, and risk. And the first two get a lot of attention, right? Somebody's going to get on Bloomberg radio, or they're going to get in the Wall Street Journal or Fortune because they did such an awesome job growing the company, right? Or they're a guru somehow of squeezing profits out of the company. But nobody that I can remember is ever sort of put on a pedestal because they're a great risk manager, right?
It's not sexy.
I don't hear people getting. No, it's not. People.
It's not as sexy as the other two. Yeah.
It's not nearly as sexy, right? You don't hear about getting big bonuses for being a great risk manager, right? Or becoming CEO of a Fortune 500 company because it's such a great risk manager. But golly, we sort of had that lesson driven back home to us with Silicon Valley Bank, didn't we? Right? Banking is all about risk management. And I think, not that I'm a banking expert, I'm not, but from afar, it certainly looks like the executives kind of forgot about that very important role of the company. And because they failed to manage risk, that company went from being worth billions of dollars to zero pretty much in 36 hours, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, that's not necessarily going to happen with every company, but it's so overlooked. And I think that the people that understand risk the best are going to make the best deals.
Okay. One of the topics you mentioned that I thought was really interesting, and I come across quite a bit in my practice, is the owner being too involved in the business. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So
relative to risk, especially.
So one of the biggest risks you can have as a business is to be too dependent on the owner, right? And an example of that in the public markets is Berkshire Hathaway, right? I know that Warren Buffett has named a successor, but come on, I don't know how much faith the market really has in Warren Buffett's successor. Most people don't know who it is. Warren Buffett, for all intents and purposes, and to a lesser extent Charlie Munger, are that company over at Berkshire Hathaway. On the other hand, Apple did a great job with transition, right? They really didn't miss a beat going from Steve Jobs to Tim Cook. Now, you can quibble with some of the strategic decisions that Tim Cook made. I think Apple screwed up the MacBook line for a long time. I think they neglected the Macintosh for far too long. But you can't argue with the results. And the result is that company has become, one of the most valuable companies on the planet under Tim Cook's stewardship, right? So what do I know? But the goal of any owner of a company that wants to sell that company should be to make themselves as irrelevant as possible. Get your name out of there, find people to replace you, and really get yourself to a position of, if you were to go on an African safari for 3 months, would the company A, thrive, B, be barely hanging on for dear life, or C, be gone, right?
Yes.
And you really want
Yes.
it to be A. And if
Yeah.
it's C, then you got to start like yesterday.
I think I told you that I was on a panel not too long ago, and this guy came up to me in kind of a snarky way, and he goes, "So, hey, a consultant, let's say I get cancer and I only have 3 months to live. What should I be thinking about relative to my business?" And I said, "Why did you wait till you got cancer to think about transitioning your business? You should think about it the day you open the doors, right?
Yep.
You should constantly be thinking of, how do I get myself out of here?" And early on in early stage businesses, a lot of times the business owner or business founder is the rainmaker. And that's great,
Right.
but that's not scalable or valuable to a buyer, right?
And it's not transferable, right?
Right.
At least
Right.
not easily. Right.
Yes.
If you're
Yes.
the seller doesn't want to work for the business going forward. That's why they're selling it. They want to drop off the keys and retire to their condo in Costa Rica,
Yeah.
right? But they're forced to not do that because the buyer feels like they need a 2-year transition period to try to transition the relationships from the seller to the buyer,
Yeah.
basically. And so most often the reason that there is significant risk wrapped up in the owner is because of the sales relationships that the owner has.
Yep. And I had a client where they bought a company and were still reliant on the owner, and the owner just died. So there's a lot of scrambling happening
Yeah.
there to salvage those relationships that he had nurtured for 40 years, right? So that transition was not done very well either. So in terms of managing risk, one is, if you're the owner, you've got to be irrelevant. And I love that word. I use that word all the time as well. Is there anything else you would add to that?
Well, the second biggest risk that buyers look at is customer concentration, right? Generally speaking,
Ah,
once a single customer accounts for 10% or more of annual revenue, price starts to go down because of the risk
yes.
associated with that customer. And whether that customer has been a customer of the company for 10 minutes or for 10 years doesn't really matter. That customer could go away because they have a change in leadership. They could go away because the buying person in the company leaves and is replaced by somebody else with their own relationship. That company could go out of business. That company could get bought. In fact, I was
Yeah,
just
now you're
just
getting
talking
in
to another
Jane's
company
world.
earlier today.
Yeah,
Yeah, there you go. Right, Jane's World.
yeah,
That's a new
yeah.
TV
So,
show.
so
Jane's World.
yes, I spend a lot of time. Well, first of all, let me back up and say this. I think part of being able to sell your company is being able to tell a good story about the potential of your company, right? And so I ask clients to show me where their business comes from. I'm a little surprised at how many people don't know the answer to that without pulling a report. And when I say that, what I'm looking for is buckets, right? So you referred to a bucket, the big bucket, right? I want to look at the small and middle bucket also, for a couple of reasons. One, it's not really good to have concentration on any of those ends. And I have both of those scenarios right now with clients that I'm working with. So one has few clients because they're giant. Um, and yeah, they've been there for 20 years, but first off, the market is changing. So their product is looking less and less relevant to those clients, which is a big concern. But as we were just talking about, one of those customers is gone and you're in a big situation, right? So in that scenario, we're working towards moving into that middle bucket, revenue bucket. The second scenario is a client that has a ton of concentration in little jobs, right? Well, what's the problem with that? The problem with that is you jam up your whole back end system, your delivery system, right? So I said, what would happen if you move 20% of that business into the next revenue bucket? And he said, holy crap, I'm going to blow my number for the year. Like I'll totally hit it out of the park, right? And not stress the rest of my organization. So one thing that I look at when I'm first in a company is, where is that business coming from? And do we have a good balance of where our business comes from? The second thing is to help owners understand all business is not good business. I told you when I ran a company, I fired the biggest brand in Atlanta as a client, and everybody said, oh my gosh, Jane, that's a terrible decision. You know, they run this many millions of dollars through our company. And I said, yeah, but it costs us this many millions of dollars plus this out of the company. They're not a profitable client. And, you know, the adage in PR that all PR is good PR does not translate to sales. So if you're going to have a client that's losing, you would have to give me a really great argument for that. So that's the second thing that shows up when we look at that concentration of clients, is then we just start to dig in and say, are they good clients or are they losers for the organization?
I agree with that. In fact, I've long believed that a business defines itself not by what it does, but what it doesn't do. And by an extension, by the clients it doesn't serve.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, I can name every single client I've regretted taking on, because they just become this Vietnam that we're just trying to get peace with honor at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But I cannot remember a client that I didn't take on and wish that I had. I never found out later that I should have taken them on.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've got to know when to say no and not just jump at everything. The other part of that story, I think, Mike, if you're telling a good story as an owner to somebody that is a potential buyer, is what I'm doing repeatable and scalable? And obviously, if the owner is too involved in the business, the answer to that is right off the bat, no. But you've got to be able to show that you've got the right processes in the organization and you've got the right alignment in the organization, and that what you're doing is in fact replicatable and scalable. Would you agree with that?
Oh, for sure. And especially in sales, and this is really more your bailiwick than mine. But the most important process, I think, one of the most important, the others like safety, for example, are more important, but one of the most important processes is your sales process. And the sales process is what distinguishes the unsaleable company to the saleable company, right? If your revenue primarily comes from some people that you played high school football with, right? I can't go back and play high school football with them. Right. I got to find entirely new leads and entirely new ways of moving them through the process, right? And that's what gives the buyer confidence that once they take on the business, it doesn't just become a money pit.
It's so interesting to me that you are so big on that. Coming from where you come from, I mean, I know why it's important, right? I've lived there for a long time. And oftentimes I'm having to educate an owner, first off, what is the sales process? Secondly, why do we have it? And where do you put safeguards in that process, right? So I describe the process. I say, hey, the reason for a sales process is we know we win more this way than we lose, but we always go forward. We never go backward. So you have to know, if your sales process is going back and forth and you don't have a good sales process, or you're not implementing it well, because there's no backward in a sales process. It's, did I accomplish all of these things? And if I didn't, I don't get to go here. And so for a valuation person to say, sales process is critical to the value of your business, I'm not going to jump up and down right now, but it makes me want to, because I know how important it is.
Well, I think that, my job is to figure out what the value of a business is, and my clients aren't just doing it for their health, right? They're really they're relying on me to perform a comprehensive analysis, right? And we both know that, if not the hardest part of a business, or the most vital part of a business, one of them is the ability to generate revenue, right? And so, I have to look very hard at how a company generates revenue, and even in my world, where historically sales has all been about how much you get out into the market, how many business cards you collect, how many relationships you generate. But that's not scalable, nor is it, I think, sustainable, right? You burn out over that. I certainly did. And you also, you can't clone yourself, right? So, one of the things we're doing as we evolve our business is looking very closely at how can we generate qualified leads when we're asleep, and what is the process to qualify and convert that lead, and then track that to see if what we're doing is working, or if we need to change it, right? And only when we accomplish that, and we will, but only when we accomplish that, do we really have a business, as opposed to kind of a confederacy of business development people to be sharing the same cost structure.
Yeah. One of the top three most difficult things in a business is your having a good sales organization. And I feel like I'm constantly beating the drum with clients, telling them, you don't actually have salespeople. You have order takers, or you've hired the wrong skill set. That's a whole nother conversation, right? But sales has some art to it, but it is not as much of an art as small or mid-sized business owners think it is. There's a lot of process. There's a lot of data around what makes a great salesperson, what a high performer looks like compared to a mid-level or low performer. And those high performers are not a very big group, by the way. So then you have to know how to keep them, comp them, and keep them. But I love that this even came up in this conversation, because I think it's critical. And it goes back to keeping the owner out of the business, making it scalable, repeatable, right? That's sales all day. And being able to tell a great story about what the potential is of your company, not just what it shows
It's risk
today.
management.
Yeah.
It's
And risk management, right? So what are some of the KPIs that you would look at? What are some of the drivers that you look at when you're valuing a business for somebody?
So I'm glad you mentioned drivers versus indicators, because those are two different things, and they're important. Key performance indicators tell you what happened. Key performance drivers tell you what is happening and how that may influence the key performance indicators, right? So I focus much more on the key performance drivers, and again, revenue is really important. So I want to know how many leads are being generated, but not only that, that's really a KPI. I want to know what processes are being done to generate leads, right? How many newsletters are going out? How many addresses are being added net to your email list, right? How many users are being added to your social media audiences, right?
You sound like a
And how
marketing
often are you
guy. I love
publishing
it.
content?
Yeah.
Gotta be, right. I'm a Hydra. I've got to wear a lot of hats, right? So, but
Yeah.
marketing is certainly one of them. How many calls are going out? Most salespeople need to be making 6 to 8 calls an hour, something like that, maybe more, depending
Yeah, I'd
on what
say
that looks
shoot for
like.
100 a day.
I'll shoot for 100 a day, right? So
Yeah.
I'm even undershooting. It should be about 15 to 20 an hour, right? So,
Mhm.
I want to know the activities. Are the activities being done? because if the activities are being done, there's a good chance your KPIs are going to turn out pretty well, pretty
Yeah.
good. And if they're not being done, I don't need to look at the KPIs, because if they're good, it means they were dumb luck. And if they're not good as I expect, I'm already wasting time, right? I should be focusing on why are the drivers not being executed as consistently and faithfully as they need to be to drive the desired result.
Yeah, that's what makes you a good manager of those things, because I tell sales managers all the time, you can't course correct numbers. Don't be confused to think your job is to manage sales numbers. You can't course correct numbers. You can only course correct behavior.
Yep.
So you should be tracking the behavior that's going to get you to the number, right? And so if you're not managing the behavior, you will not get to the number consistently. You will have months of dumb luck, like you said, and months where you don't know what the hell happened. I'd love to add and get your point of view on this, that I think one of the other key performance indicators of a healthy organization is a healthy culture. And people think you can't actually measure that, but in fact you can. And people think culture is this, here comes my COVID cough. Sorry. People think that culture is this squishy thing that has no meaning, but I would argue again that that's not the case, right? So a healthy culture, in my opinion, your organization knows what the vision is for the company. In other words, they know where we're going and how we'll know when we've gotten there. So they're aligned around the path forward for the company. I would say that you can easily measure engagement, and a highly engaged culture, is a clear indication of a healthy culture. There are ways to measure the adaptability of your culture and the consistency of the things that you do, right? And so I'd love your point of view on that, because I think owners undervalue really a healthy culture in an organization.
Well, they do. They often do. I mean, I think more owners are catching on to this because they're seeing the negative impacts of a bad culture in terms of turnover and the inability to hire new people in, right? I mean, Glassdoor and social media in general are becoming the great equalizer, where there are now a lot of warning flags out there around toxic cultures, basically. Interestingly enough, yesterday I posted a chart within my private LinkedIn group that comes from an MIT Sloan. I think it's called the Sloan Business Review, sort of the Harvard Business Reviews.
Oh, I saw that
Competing,
on
yeah,
dissatisfaction.
and scientists or social scientists have measured what defines a toxic work culture, right? And it was real, and maybe I'll share that with you, and if you want, you can share it with your audience. But the point is that work is now being done to actually quantify what constitutes a bad culture.
Yep.
And I think that that's relevant because I do think there's something to the expression that culture is the worst behavior that the organization is willing to tolerate. I actually think there is something to that. So if you believe that as well, then this chart is actually very helpful, because it shows you which behaviors you simply cannot tolerate if your goal is to have a cultivating culture that enables your workforce to thrive.
Yeah, I do agree. And one of the hardest conversations that I have with owners is telling them that they should fire a toxic high performer. It's especially difficult if that high performer is a salesperson.
Yep.
And yet there is data to support the fact that the ship gets leveled. When you cut that high performer, the ship levels out because of the impact that that person had, the negative impact that most owners are unaware of, that that person had on the organization. And so everybody else lifts up, right? And yet it is still one of the most difficult conversations to have with an owner. It's terrifying to them, and which I completely understand, for somebody like me to come in there and say, yeah, you got to let that go. That is just, that cancer is just spreading everywhere.
And I agree with all of that. And in addition to that, the second that you as the owner are afraid to let somebody in the company go, you no longer own your own company. You just don't. That key person does, right? And so then there really is a second order conversation you need to have. If that person is really that important, you need to make them an equity partner in the company so that they never leave.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, the other thing I say is you should be always recruiting in the background.
Yep.
I don't mean always hiring, but you should be always recruiting. You should never be held hostage by a person in a particular role in your organization. Yeah. And I agree with you. If they're that important, then you need to make sure they can't leave, right? That they
right.
leave something really, really big behind. So I agree with you. Are there any kind of last, I think those were the three things that we really nailed down in our conversation. Are there any last thoughts that you would leave anybody with, Mike?
Only that, and not just in this environment, in every environment, if you want to build the value of your business quickly, the easiest thing you can do is focus on risk, right? It's hard to grow sales in the short term, Jane, as you of all people know. It's rarely a quick fix. Sometimes it is, I guess, but pretty rarely, right? It's somewhat easier to improve profitability, but often that's a slash and burn kind of discussion, which can be useful in the long term, but in short term would have long-term negative repercussions. But the fact of the matter is that risk never goes out of style. You will never hurt your company or yourself by lowering your risk and making the company more resilient, so that when bad things happen to it, like a key person leaves, it not only survives, but actually has the chance to thrive.
Yeah, yeah. And I would say know what it is that you have to sell, which seems kind of like a silly statement. But I've had owners say, hey, if somebody that wants to buy my business, and I say, well, your business isn't really sellable at the moment. And I get a blank stare and I go, well, what is it that you think they want to buy from you? Do you have any proprietary IP? Do you have any proprietary technologies? Your customers that they want to what is interesting about you to them? And I find sometimes people don't know the answer to that question. And that's important if you're going to be able to tell your story well to a potential buyer.
Yeah, it is really important, because if you have a chunk of cash that you can use to buy business, you can do other things with it from an investment standpoint that are much easier, right? Mm-hmm. You can buy bonds, you can buy into the stock market, you can buy real estate funds, right? So you have to make a compelling case to the buyer that they're better off going through the hassle of buying you as opposed to doing something else with that cash.
Yeah, because what buyers don't, or sellers don't realize, is the vast majority of these purchases do not go through, right?
Sure. I mean, yeah. And again, it's a classic case of you never see on the internet, plane lands safely.
Yes. Right? Yeah, right.
We hear about the plane crashes, the car crashes.
Yeah.
Right. And very few people talk about a non-deal, right? Unless it's Elon Musk, and then he sort of got browbeaten to buying Twitter when he didn't want it.
Yeah.
But that's very much the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah. So how do people get in touch with you if they are they're serious enough to get a valuation on their organization.
So, whether it's a valuation or they just have a question they want to chat about, contact me by email, S as in Sierra, Blake at bradyware.com. And also, I'm on LinkedIn in particular. I'm not hard to find. My handle is unblakeable, so you can find me there on LinkedIn. Same thing for Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook as well. So I'm not hard to find.
Good. I'm so grateful to you for spending time with me. It's always good
Thank
to
you for
see
hanging on.
you.
It's always a treat to hang out with you.
All right.